Hey everyone. So today, my talk is going to be about ethics in the age of artificial intelligence. If we think about this brave new world that's emerging, what's really fascinating to see is there's all kinds of opportunities to be able to use artificial intelligence and machine learning to be able to change the nature of work, to be able to change the nature of how we get things done. So the good news is when bad things happen, when there's catastrophic loss, like what you're looking at here. This is Port Arthur, Texas. You can actually now take drones, fly overhead on a specific asset area like a flooded area like Port Arthur, or a hail-stricken area just like Dallas as of last night, or a hurricane-impacted region where all of these points of damage that have occurred can be easily adjudicated using technology, whether it be a drone, artificial intelligence, to be able to detect what that damage looks like, and then be able to make a claim and an adjudication on that claim within literally hours after the tech is on site. And so we've seen that work this past few years. Certainly my company has been working on a few things at Kespry where we've enabled a lot of recovery efforts to be handled with the combination of artificial intelligence and machine learning combined with the data that's generated off of aerial imagery. These analytical processes that are being built today can actually accelerate to the point where a claims adjudicator is now covering an order of 3 homes per hour versus typically 3 homes per day. This is what the Farmers CEO got up on CNBC and said just not more than a year ago. But when we look at what's going on under the covers, it's actually quite interesting to see why this is happening. What is this sort of new classification that's emerged around machine learning that's making this possible? It turns out that when you apply enough data and enough algorithms today to all kinds of classification-based problems, you can get some very remarkable insights. This is an example that I'm just showing you here where without understanding what a skylight is or without understanding what a satellite dish is, you can actually train a machine learning model to be able to understand what those elements are and classify and automate that directly on top of what a claims adjudication process might look like. In a similar vein, you can do that for hail damage. In a similar vein, you can do that for wind damage. The reason why that's possible today is that you are taking this whole school of thought called narrow artificial intelligence, the ability to automate things that traditionally humans have done and be able to scale that in a way with an efficiency that we've never seen before. It's not general AI. It's not a situation where we're tasking very complex, call it intellectual activities, whether that be nuanced interactions or problem solving. It's basically scaling out what would be traditionally rote tasks and bringing that to bear. How is that now happening? From a machine learning standpoint, well, there's a whole class of machine learning that's emerged, which is actually known as deep learning. And the context around deep learning, just a quick primer on what you're seeing here, is that you can now go ahead and be able to look at a series of faces, deconstruct those faces, and understand what all the patterns are associated with the face, and then reconstruct that in a way where you can repeatably know the nuanced layers and the sort of interaction between the breakdown of that data set in a meaningful way. And really, that's what our brains themselves do. Because if you look at today, our brains are actually using this notion of a information bottleneck to basically process and repeat how we can actually recognize things from a human intelligence standpoint. We can now replicate that with machines in a way that we've never been able to before. The dilemma now is that as much as we think about these things being used for the force of good, we can actually also see scenarios where this is used for evil. In this particular example, about a year and a half ago, I was actually at the White House, and we talked about the use of drones for all the amazing use cases that I just mentioned and more. And in Homeland Security, we were actually given a pretty significant pushback because around that time in Ramada, this is actually in Iraq, it turns out that the same technology that I just mentioned, the use of a drone off the shelf, the use of artificial intelligence to do targeting, to basically look at a scenario where, in this case, school kids were targeted in a schoolyard. And so in this particular case, grenades were actually dropped from drones that were actually using the same targeting sequence for a purpose of lethality that we would never have imagined. You know, even someone like myself who works on this day in, day out was just shocked, right? Because the same capabilities, the same technology that you think about every day as being used for good can actually be used for nefarious evil. So we're living in a very interesting time, right? It's not just about this ethics around what's good, what's bad, but it's how this technology gets applied by who applies it. And it's all out there. It's all available for anyone to take advantage of the way they choose to take advantage of it. You layer in this deeper moral obligation that's now emerged around the technology that we're talking about. If you look at this dislocation that we see today in society, if you look at how much the gap between income, between the wealthiest in the world as well as the poorest, is now separating, where literally 99.99% of all the income growth in the world is actually occurring in this sort of very small stratosphere. And if you look at how much the rest of the working world, the people that are kind of the blue-class citizens of most of the countries in the world, are actually not advancing forward, not just because of like artificial intelligence and machine learning, but just the rampant acceleration of technology in front of us for the last 2 to 3 decades. It's even more prevalent when we look at just what the disconnection looks like between wages and productivity. Look at how much we've seen now a separation as of 1980 in terms of this sort of linear curve that we were on for almost ever and a day, as far as what the productivity and the labor compensation was surrounding that productivity. And then there was this kink in the curve in 1980. Why was that? Well, it actually turns out it's driven by tech. Tech actually created a vast divide between the productivity of the corporations that we're all part of and the hourly compensation rate of the people that are working in these organizations. And so if we look at this challenge, we're in this midst of being able to think about what the nature of how to reformat work could be in a meaningful and more dignified way. But at the same time, we're seeing a rapid acceleration in terms of what this dislocation looks like, not only for folks that are in retail sales or cashiers or waiters, but look at this: loan officers, credit analysts, accountants, compensation managers, things that are considered, jobs that are high paying and generate a fair amount of value are being replaced mostly by the fact that these machines and capabilities that I've just talked about a moment ago are now being applied at a scale that we can't even imagine in society today. And so I think that as we think about this great future, a lot of our calling as this generation is really looking at tech in a way that has to be applied in a more moral and a more ethical way, is that we have to start to kind of move outside of our own little prosperity bubble that we all live in. Particularly here in the Valley, it's very, very easy for us to get caught up in our own prosperity bubbles. And then really reach out, understand how we can actually apply this with a level of humility to understand how to help, how to solve real problems. And this is where I think there is a tremendous opportunity in front of us. In 1960, J.C.R. Licklider wrote a seminal piece called The Man-Machine Symbiosis. I'd actually look it up. It's only a 4 or 5 page paper. He was far ahead of his time because he talks about machines not replacing us, but machines augmenting the potential of us humans. And if we look at this great future that we're arriving to in an accelerated fashion, we're seeing machines assist humans. We're seeing the support of artificial intelligence, for many times for good, unfortunately, a fair amount of times for evil. And so as we look at these opportunities, it's almost just as important as this Pandora's box opens up that we have to search within ourselves to understand how to serve ourselves with the use of this technology in a way that is more ethical, that's more moral than we can ever imagine before. Thank you.